So let's begin. Welcome everyone to the third webinar, this time on sensor network, the webinars of novel technologies from the task 2.3.1 in Biodiversa Plus. So just a general introduction at those of you who are not familiar with the partnership Biodiversa Plus. This is an European biodiversity partnership supporting excellent research on biodiversity with an impact on policy and society. So we, by Biodiversa Plus, we do many different things, and we are organized in different work packages with different thematics. So there's a work package dedicated to research and innovation programs and projects, how to connect these programs to policies, another work package for internationalization, for the promotion and support of nature-based solutions. But we, in the coordinators of this webinar, are part of the work package 2, that aims at promoting and supporting transnational biodiversity monitoring, more concretely with the objective of setting up a network of harmonized schemes to improve monitoring of biodiversity and ecosystem services across Europe. So this is a little bit of the overview of Biodiversa Plus, very general. And concretely, in work package 2, we have different tasks with different objectives as well. We aim at identifying priorities and defining common indicators. This is all it all goes together as well with the harmonization of protocols and databases, and we are aiming for data interoperability. There's another task working on the involvement of citizen science, how we use monitoring data, and our task, who is organizing these webinars, is the novel technologies and approaches. This is also related to some different biodiversity monitoring pilots that are currently going on. If you have been in previous webinar, we have discussed some of them. If you haven't been there, we have the video that we can maybe share later with you in case you are interested on eDNA or bioacoustics. And yes, all of these will join together into building the network of biodiversity monitoring schemes. So concretely, in our task for novel technologies and approaches, last year we launched a survey to see how partners in Biodiversa Plus were deploying novel technologies for biodiversity monitoring. We wanted to see which taxa were target and what essential biodiversity variables were they using, and also, very importantly, their challenges and constraints in doing so. So concretely for sensor networks, we identified that this network, this novel technology was very unknown among partners, and there's of course less. If you see this in this part of the image, there's less constraints that partners could report due to this lack of knowledge, and this is why maybe for us this is one of the most important webinars that we are launching, since we need to get more knowledge out there on this novel technology. So this is it for me. So the agenda: first we will have Georg Niedrist from Eurac Research, and also a participant in Biodiversa Plus through the government of Bolzano. And then the next presentation will be by Lluís Gómez Gener from the Institute of Environmental Assessments and Water Research, who is participating also through the government of Catalonia here in this session. And as I said previously, after both presentations, we will have time for questions or debate. So feel free to begin to put some questions in this section that we have there, but also in the end, you can just raise your hands virtually and ask directly to the speakers. So this is it for me, and thank you very much all for coming, and of course to the speakers for being present here today. And let's go.
Okay, so thank you, Gloria, for the invitation and introduction. Hello to everybody. My name is Georg Niedrist. I'm a researcher at Eurac Research Institute, which is basically a public research institution in the north of Italy. So similar to university, just without teaching, just research. And I try to share my screen right now. So should work right now, hopefully. So honestly, I don't know if I'm the right person for this important webinar. I'm not an expert on fancy new technology. I'm not a programmer or, let's say, database expert. I'm just a normal ecologist, as maybe some of you as well. I'm coordinating research activities in a so-called LTR site, which is long-term ecological research site, which is called Mazia, also in the northern part of Italy. And in the preparation of this webinar, we explored the potential, or let's say the benefits to the Biodiversa Plus community. And yeah, maybe there are some aspects from our activities that hopefully are useful for your activities. As I said, so I'm just a coordinator. So what I'm presenting right now is teamwork from many members of our institute, especially from my colleague Alessandro Zando and I. So don't put me too difficult questions on some programming or whatever. I have to forward all those questions to my colleague. Anyway, let's start. So as I said, I bring you right now in the middle of the Alps. This is where our research site is located. And to give you some background, skip this. On our research activities, or how the story started. So it's a small catchment around 100 square kilometers, which is actually quite dry. You see those grassland vegetation on the right side, and it goes on. Yeah, it's agriculturally used. It's quite a small village right in the middle of the catchment. As I said, it's a quite dry region, even if that doesn't look like in this picture. But you see those artificial water channels that are hundreds of years old. They bring the water from the glacier to the fields. So we have different kinds of agriculture intensity. There's grassland, arable land as well. We have different kind of forests in the catchment. You see those nice colored large forests in the lower parts, and in the upper parts you have these pinus sembra forests right to the tree line. If we move upwards, then we come in the alpine region where we have shrub-dominated land. We have those glacier-fed streams, and finally on those areas where the glacier are disappearing, we have those like Mars landscapes where slowly, or actually quite fast, vegetation is developing and landscape is changing. So quite a heterogeneous landscape, and our research topics within this landscape are nothing particular. So it's just to study the effects of climate change and land use on biodiversity, ecosystem functions, to observe those changes through the scale. So means both time scale and geographical scales, also along altitudinal gradients, and to understand also the human environment interactions, everything along those or among this very heterogeneous landscape from very intensive apple orchards in the bottom of the valley to the glacier area. So as you can see there, the scientific questions are here very generic, but if you look at the question from a data perspective, you see we have climate data, there are land use data, biodiversity data, ecosystem data. We have different scales, and we have even the human factor. So this is, from a data perspective, a nightmare. So it's basically everything and every different complexity level that you want. So what I will tell you today is much focused on the climate data. So this is where we spent most effort in the last years. So the work is still in progress, and we are right in the middle of this nightmare. So we want to, I said that we want to focus on climate, but if you are in the mountain landscapes, the question is always which climate, the microclimate. So this is a thermal image from the steep slopes above the village, and you can see in those different colors how heterogeneous the landscape is in terms of microclimate. So this is just the soil surface temperature, and you see those very wide parts here on the steep slopes. This is actually grassland dominated. And right just around the corner, you have soil temperatures that are 20, 30 degrees lower than here on those hotspots. So the challenge is, if you want to understand the climate or the climatic changes in those landscapes, to really to get an idea of the heterogeneity. And that's why we decided to distribute different climate stations all over this catchment. So from those very low parts right up to the glacier. And yeah, we call it kind of open air laboratory, Matzia. So yeah, basically as a lab just under the sky. And the idea was not just to understand what are the climatic changes along different elevations and ecosystems, but also to provide reliable climate data for every other research which is going on within this catchment. So if you're doing some biodiversity monitoring, we can provide you climatic data right from just around the corner. So this was the basic idea of this activity, which started right 15 years ago. So we started in 2009 with setting up those climate stations. We equipped them with the most important climatic or microclimate sensors. So that means temperature, air humidity, wind, of course. Then everything which is related to the water cycle, so rain gauges, snow height. Then a lot of sensors in the soil, so soil water content, soil water potential, which is depending from the soil, of course, a huge difference. Soil temperature, always in different depth. So that means near surface up to 50 centimeters, which in alpine soils is more or less the maximum. Then we have a lot of radiation-related parameters or optical parameters, so different components of radiation, net radiation, of course. Then phenocams, NDVI sensors. So this is just a very short summary. And finally, all of those stations have been equipped with to be accessed remotely, and that they are able to deliver the data automatically. All in all, is kind of overview on the different locations, also on the different equipment. No, not every station is equipped in the same way. We have also very specific sensors like this picture in the middle from an covariance tower. Some of the stations have been changed throughout the time because we were not happy with the sensors. And so all in all, we have 24 climate stations within this catchment, and with overall data collection of 2 million records per week. So when we started in 2009, we were quite optimistic, quite motivated. We started the data flow with a lot of Excel tables, with a lot of folders, hundreds of folders, and we ended up like, a complete mess, to be honest. So the first years were quite difficult in terms of data management. We realized that this was for sure not the way how you can handle this amount of data. And so we decided on data management strategy based on the sensors, which was in 2000. We started the activities in 2014, so 5 years later. So the first step was based on the software we used in our loggers. So in this case, it was from Campbell Scientific. So we used the LoggerNet that with this software we managed this automatic download. So we had not to go there physically, but there is an hourly download to the server, which is here in Eurac Research. And this program provides you a very rough overview on the data completeness. So this is what the picture on the right side should display. On the same time, we developed a monitoring system, not of the environment, but a monitoring system on the data. So this was developed by ourselves, as I said, by my colleagues. It has basically two different functions. First, it's a kind of quality check. So we are checking if the data are complete, so if there are some data gaps, and if the data are within a certain range. So we designed values that are reliable for every sensor, for every station, and we implemented this email warning system. So if the data are without or out of this range, our collaborator gets a direct automatic email alert that there's something not going well, and at the same time they get a weekly report on the most important parameters. So just that he gets a rough overview with some very basic graphs if the system is running well. I think everybody of you now is familiar with this FAIR principle. So FAIR stands for definable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data management. So it's requested basically in all new projects proposed right now. It was not that common 15, 20 years ago. Anyway, this is so far our guideline. We are not ready to fulfill every aspect of this FAIR principles, but we're trying to do our best. And for some aspects, we are on the road. So some aspects a little bit less. Anyway, this is let's say what drives us to go on with our data management. So from the point on that the data are in our on our server, we have basically to organize it from two different points of view. First, the data itself. We are using this Influx DB, this an open source database, especially adapted to time series. And at the same time, we have to manage our metadata. Metadata are often forgotten because they are not as attractive for researchers. You're working with the data but not with the metadata. And on the other hand, especially with those complex networks, you have to organize your sensors and you have to organize your stations just also from a maintenance point of view. You have to know which station has which sensor on which depth or altitude and with which characteristics and so on. So you have to know an overview on which sensor is at which location. And for this purpose, we are also using this open software, which is NIPT and MariaDB. At the next point, once we have the data organized within ourselves, it's time to share the data. Of course, it's to share within our institute, but of course to share them among the whole research community. Therefore, we develop basically two tools. So one is this data browser. I just go now directly on the live link. So it's an interface where you can just select the station you want or the parameter you want. Let's assume air temperature. You can select the station. So it's highlighted here in yellow. And you can also do the selection if you want by altitude or on land use. So it depends on your purpose. And then you have the possibility to download the data by CSV, so for Excel readable format, or which is probably more interesting, you can select between two different ways to access the data with R or with Python. So if you can just download or access the data using a Python script. The R script currently is not working due to issues with our server. So that's also a lesson that we learned during the time. So everything that you set up, it's always connected with troubles and ongoing troubleshooting. So this is the first tool that we are providing. So everybody can access this website. You can access most or many parameters just for free without registration. If you want to access, let's say, a bit more sophisticated data, then we ask you for registration, of course, for free. But in this case, we just are interested who are using our data, and in this case, I'm already logged in right now, but yeah, you can here ask for registration, and then you immediately get a registration or an access to the website. So this is one tool. The second tool which we developed, which is quite interesting for ourselves in this case, is this Grafana, or we use Grafana for data visualization. Again, it's for the researchers, of course, but especially in this case, this visualization is important for ourselves to monitor if the stations are working well and if the data has a certain quality. Again, in this case, we have everybody can access this database or this tool. So as a public user, and again, if you are interested to use more complex or let's say high quality data which are not that common, then we ask for a registration. Just to give you a short overview how it looks like. Again, this is a live link. So I'm logged in, and I can now access different stations like this one. This is the live webcam picture, and you see the most important parameters here at the first view, and then we have all the different parameters in the graph down there. You see here the humidity. We had very humid weather in the last weeks, and now it turned to be beautiful, as you can see on the webcam picture. We can select the different durations. So if you want to go back the last year, for example, so we just can visualize the data right now. The data are directly taken from the database. So this is not, these are real-time data. So sometimes it takes a bit of time if you are requesting 5 years of data. So it takes a little bit of time. And then you can just look at different parameters that you want. Another important aspect of this Grafana tool is, as I said, for ourselves. So we can access, or we created some thematic dashboards. So where we just join parameters that are important for us. So in this case, for example, are the batteries of the different stations. So it's this kind of spaghetti graph that you see here, but it gives you a very rough overview and a very fast overview if everything is working properly. So if we have those curves that are going up and down, that means during the day solar panels are feeding the batteries, and during the night they are losing tension, of course. So, but this is the picture how it should look like. And in this way, we can get a very fast overview if everything's working well. So, for example, precipitation is a very sensitive parameter. Here we have all stations at a glance. So in on overview, of course, this way is not useful for research, but it's very useful for us to see, okay, we have this heterogeneity between 10 millimeters and 30 millimeters in the last week. This in this catchment is quite normal. So we have this heterogeneity among climatic variables. So we can say, okay, all values look quite reliable. So we can go on to the next parameter. So these are the data, the stuff that's related to the climatic data. As I said, the same is a little bit organized, or has to be done by the metadata. We are using basically the MariaDB for the assets and the SnipeET to know which sensor is installed at which station, and if it has been changed during the time with another, with a similar sensor or from another company, and so. And this really helps you then if you are working on long time series. If you see that there are some inconsistencies, then those metadata bases are very useful. Last aspect I want to focus right now is the webcams that we are using on those stations. So they're basically taking two different kinds of pictures. We have those RGB pictures and infrared pictures. And in this case, we have set up just a short flow, data flow. So yeah, I mean, those pictures are basically not just used to look if the stations are all right and how the weather is there, but we are using the data, of course, also scientifically. So in this case, we can use the NDVI. We can compare different sensors. So for example, the decagon sensor, which is installed on the station, which is just an NDVI sensor. We can derive NDVI from MODIS data in collaboration with our colleagues from the Remote Sensing Institute. And we can derive NDVI from phenocams by comparing this and infrared data and RGB pictures. And in this case, we are uploading our phenocams on an existing database from the Northern Arizona University. They have quite a long experience on phenocams. First, of course, we are checking the data by ourselves. So the data, again, are sent hourly to our server. Then they are checked about if integrity, so if the pictures are fine. They are also checked about if there are people on the picture, because in this case they get deleted because of privacy reasons, and then they get uploaded to this webcam database, which is actually quite nice, organized. So this is not our work, just to present you how it looked like. So we have the year here, we have the different month, and you can click on the month and see every webcam picture of this month. It has then it gives you also a very nice summary. It looks a little bit of coarse picture, but actually this is nothing more than every pixel of the webcam through the year. And you see here the snow cover. This is the highest station where we have snow cover until mid of June, and it starts right end of October this year. So it gives you already a very fast feedback or a quality check on your webcam data. As I said, this is has been developed by the colleagues in North America. Yes, so just to summarize, we have the data that can send to our server at Eurac. There we have the monitoring system with some alerts, email alerts. We have the quality checks, and then the data get organized in those two databases, so the data itself and the metadata. And we have developed 3 different data sharing tools to access the data, the time series. Then there's this 4th aspect for the phenochem that we have seen right now, and there is the whole metadata aspect. So this already seems quite chaotic, or let's say quite complex, and unfortunately the story gets even more complex if you are jumping into the biodiversity aspect. So we are currently working on that. So I have no final solutions for that right now. But there are some points that have to be considered. So first, biodiversity data. The problem there is that we have a very heterogeneous timestamps. So for time series, you can just set 10 minutes, 15 minutes, hourly data, and then you get your climate data every interval that you have set up. For biodiversity data, it's different. So depending on the organism, you can have frequencies that are at the 2nd level, even up to vegetation surveys that are being done once a year, for example. So you have very different heterogeneous timestamps. Then you have different methods for the same organisms, probably. So that also means that you have different quality levels for the same organism. Just think on citizen science data, or data that are derived from experts. So you probably have to think on flagging the data with a kind of green, red, yellow flags in terms of to ensure data quality. The same is true for geolocation. For the meteo stations, it's quite simple in the sense of you have the station at a very fixed position, and it doesn't go around, it just stays there. For biodiversity, if you think on a sensor that is installed on a car that just goes along the road to detect invasive species, for example, or if you go for birth monitoring, then you go from a point to a line to an area. So it's much more difficult in terms of geolocation. And finally, the automation is always a challenge. Depends, of course, on the sensor that you are using. But if you think on the typical field work, so that probably there is no way for automation, and you have to include all your data manually. And to give a final level of chaos, so if you include also data from social science, as we did in our research area, it even gets more complicated, because there you get just quality data, you get answers, you get opinions. So how to deal with that in databases? So we have no solution here, and probably there is also no solution. So I'm a huge fan of databases in the meantime, but if you require too much time to develop them, just for including 3 surveys, so then it's maybe better to keep them separated in Excel files as well. So just to come up with 3 final considerations, so some lessons we learned in the last 15 years. So the first one, think on your data management just before buying the first instrument and the first sensor. So this is normally done in this, from the point on that we get the first data, then we think on the data storage. I think it has to be done much earlier, and it has to be considered or planned also in terms of money. So our experience, this is just a very rough estimation. So every euro you spend per sensor, you have also to spend for data management. So if you have some complicated or complex sensors that costs, I don't know, 50,000 euros, you have to allocate the same amount of money for the data management or for the people that are working with the data. Otherwise, you probably end up with those very famous data cemeteries that probably all of you, or at least we have them quite large. Second consideration, step by step. Everything that I have shown you right in the last 30 minutes, it's a process of more than 15 years. So don't try to do everything right in the first moment. Just go step by step. And we have to be aware of that probably for every research project, for every monitoring project, you have to find your own solution. So this math that I presented you before works quite properly for our purpose, but most probably not for your purpose. So maybe some modules, some tools, different tools from the whole processes are very useful for it, but you have to find your own way to organize this. This is probably I don't call it a negative message, but there is probably no perfect system ready for every activity, for every monitoring system. And finally, an effective sensor and data management needs teamwork. So this is probably seems logic, but that's really a lesson that we learned. So normally as a researcher, at least I am not able to do programming at a certain level. So I need technician, I need computer specialist or database specialist that are able to translate my ideas into practice, into databases, and vice versa. Also, technicians are not researchers, so you have, as a researcher, you have to tell them the intervals, you have to tell them where to put the sensors, and you have to tell them which kind of data you want to be displayed in which way. So it's really needed that for, let's say, a successful sensor network data management, we need an interdisciplinary team. This, unfortunately, is not able for every project, for every monitoring project. But if you are setting up something from new, from the beginning, try to get an interdisciplinary team. So this is basically all I can tell you from our experience from the Matzia research side. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much to you, Georg, for this amazing presentation. I think many of the topics you have brought up now are very common to many other novel technologies and are very interesting for all of our attendees here in the webinar. And now, welcome to Lluís. Whenever you're ready, Lluís, we are happy to hear you.
Thanks so much for the invitation. I hope I fulfill your requirements. So I'm Lluís Gómez from the Institute of Environmental Assessment and Water Research in Barcelona. I'm a researcher in there, so mostly working on high mountain limnology. So for those of you who don't know, limnology is the science that study inland waters. So basically we study remote high mountain lakes and river networks in the Pyrenees, okay? Because I'm sitting in Barcelona, but we spend most of the time, as Georg mentioned, in the field. So we have a research station up there. So this connects pretty well with these acknowledgements that I would like to start with. Our research station is in the heart of the Pyrenees, here in between Aragon and Catalonia, seated in Catalonia. Here you can see in green. That's Central Pyrenees, okay? And this is the place where so it's our base camp mostly, but we also have a laboratory, because as you know, waters up in the mountains need to be analyzed very fast. And we also have their places to sleep and everything. So this is also the frame of Loop, which is our research group that involves several institutions apart from mine. So we have 4 institutions in Spain that works in this area. And we are also part of this LTER Aguas Tortas. Aguas Tortas is a national park. So we are part of this long-term ecological research program, mostly for inland waters, for waters, okay? And I would like to thank to everyone in the Loop, so all the Loop crew, but mostly to Lluís Camarero and Tuan Wiedmer, who are the people that help us with the sensor network, which is very challenging as Georg advanced. And with this picture that you have here, so I like it very much for the talk today because it combines, right, this idea of sensor networks here in the middle. That's a meteo station sending data every 10 minutes, but also has some people here, 2 people skiing, but with these sticks that they are for measuring manually the snow, okay? And below in the background, you cannot see it, but there is a lake. There is one lake that has been studied for more than 20 years. That's Lake Redon, where we do limnology. We're very focused on winter limnology, what we call. That is not very common. Okay, so I will start now with a little bit of context. Okay, this is how I structure the talk. Then I will move to a case study. So I will show you one of our sensor networks and the results that we are obtaining, challenges, and so on. And then, as Georg, I will also finalize the talk with some future perspectives or challenges in the field of sensor network. Okay, most of the talk, or most of what I know, it will be related to inland waters, to catchment science in general. Okay, so I don't do a lot of biodiversity science in general, but is it very interesting to bear in mind that by studying waters or the chemistry of waters, which is what we do, we also can learn a lot about biodiversity, okay? Because we study the habitats, the physical template of the systems. So they are very connected. So by understanding the physics or the chemistry and the physics of these river systems, we can really infer on biodiversity patterns. And in this figure, you can see like a classical sampling in the field. So we are taking samples, making some measurements of the stream, and so on. So these samples that we take and we filter in the field are bring to the lab, and we analyze them. This is a classical approach where most of governments has invest on it, right? So we go every month, every week to the field, we take samples, we go to the lab, and we analyze them. Okay, this is how it looks like a graph, for instance, of this type of a strategy. That's conductivity, that's water conductivity, which is an integrator per meter of all the ions present in the water. And you can see that this has been sampled every month. You can see how the data looks like, no? These are more or less 100 years, so you have 3 measurements. If we move to a weekly sampling scheme, so every week we go to the field, we take a sample, we analyze it, it looks like that. Okay, if we move to daily variability, so to daily sampling, so every day we take a sample, you can start to see that our results change a bit. So we start to have more variability. So we start to understand how this natural change, this natural variability of our ecosystem, okay? But if we move to high frequency, that it's 10 to 30 minute samples or to 1 hour sample, you can start to see big changes, okay? For instance, in that case, we have 2 rain events that they are very, very important for in our field of study for catchment dynamics, no? You have a rain event and you have an export of ions, of metals, or whatever you study, okay? So this is very important to highlight that from samples collected at monthly or weekly intervals, these are classical approaches, one could hardly imagine the high dynamic information-rich behavior of ecosystems. So you need to really have high frequency data to really see this, to have the rich spectrum of processes occurring in catchment. So sensors are something that help us to understand these high frequency processes. And we know that there has been a revolution. This graph shows an example of water quality, what we call water quality sensors for the last 20 years. And you can see the number of papers, publications that has been arisen from using the sensors. That's a very interesting review paper that I recommend from Biodiversa et al. 2023. And this individual sensor has been very important for freshwater, for catchment science, water quality, and help us to infer in several processes, okay? I will not give detail onto this, but yes, they help into pollution control, into, for instance, catchment mass balances, into several processes that they are here reviewed in this paper. Also for soils, as you can see here, these soil sensors, for forestry, for agricultural sciences, but also for marine sciences, okay? So 60, 70 years ago, you also use a buoy, or you take sporadic samples in the ocean, in the coast, but now you have this group of, let's call automatic or these boats that can take samples every meter and also make vertical profiles. So we had this technological revolution, and as environmental scientists, we have used it. That's for example, I will not go into detail here, but that's also a very good paper, a review paper for how oceanographic platforms or sensor networks in the ocean has advanced from the 50s till now. I recommend you to be read to this. And for biodiversity, which is not my expertise, there has been also some advances, of course, in different fields. But for instance, we can select here these camera traps, also acoustic sensors for insects, for birds, for other type of animals. We also have advanced a lot into ocean communities, so Dopplers and so on. Okay, there has been like a boom into this type of sensors. But what is now we will try to summarize some of the advantages of this, let's say, high frequency or this sensor monitoring. So with sensors, we can have continuous and real-time data collection. As I told you before and explained you before, high frequency data resolution. So we move from weekly or monthly sampling campaigns that you had to go to the field to high frequency samples. And what is very interesting is that now we can do it autonomously. we don't need people going to, for instance, remote areas. We can have data gathered autonomously. Okay, so you avoid sometimes this human intervention or error, although you have other sources of error, as Georg has mentioned before. So you need like a full team to work on it and to detect the whole process of obtaining data and curate the data. And also nowadays you have less energy cost, so you can leave the sensors for a long time. In our case, most of the sensors are running during winter, which is like a challenge, but we manage it. And as I told you before, you can put these sensors in remote places, in national parks, in places like the Arctic, the Antarctica, so on. But what is also very interesting, apart from individual sensors, is this idea of integrating individual sensors into networks, right? So with sensors networks, we don't have only one value, or only one parameter. We can have several parameters at the same time, at the same place, or several places monitor it at the same time. Okay, that's a scheme of this network where you have this idea of clusters, which are a group of nodes, of sensor nodes, connected to a cluster head. And each cluster head is the one sending the data to this base station. This is just a scheme, but what is also very interesting is that from this base station, you can connect through an antenna to internet and have your data available at home. One challenge that we have faced in our group, it's not only to receive the data. So we've been struggling to find ways to also send information or to our base station, in other words. So we are now working on having a signal that goes back and forth, that we can communicate with the sensor station and tell what functions need to do. For instance, changing the time. So we know that a rain event is coming. So it will be a moment where interesting things can happen in the catchment. So we can change, for instance, from 30 minutes readings to 1 minute reading. We can also, if we know that there is a period of, for instance, a cloud period where we don't have sun, low energy period, we can also change, for instance, the number of sensors that they are reading, or for instance, increase the reading intervals and so on. So let's say two-way communication is a challenge, especially in remote areas where you don't have 4G. I will explain you later. And here it was in a scheme. Now is an example of one of our settings. So one of our interests in high mountain catchments is to understand the interaction between soils, or let's say the terrestrial ecosystem, and the rivers and lakes. Okay, because climate change is affecting terrestrial ecosystems, and this is transferred to some extent to river ecosystems. So that's why we have this kind of a scheme where we have piezometers or sensors reading in the soils, as well as, or coupled to sensors reading in the water. And this is a good example to show how a sensor network look like, because as you can see here, we have the base station, and we have some clusters, okay, of sensors. In here, for instance, we have 2 clusters reading in the soils, and each cluster has different depth. Reading at different depth, okay, to know, for instance, some chemical properties as water table move up and down when there is a drought or when there is a flood. We also have a cluster that is focused on the stream ecosystem. In here, for instance, we measure oxygen, pH, turbidity, and so many other properties that can be measured with sensors. Okay, not everything can be read by sensors in the water in that case. Okay, you still need to go with and take manual samples. Another cluster in that case is reading, for instance, it may be focused on, for instance, vegetation. And we also have some readings in the snow, as you have seen before with poles, but now we are also installing sensors as well in the snow to also know the extent of snow as well as some other properties of snow. And we might also have been interested in, for instance, rocks. For instance, if we are interested in the water that emerges from rocks or so on. That's an example of a fully integrated sensor network in high mountains. This was an example, but we have also these networks in the ocean, for instance, this one to monitor the movement of these fishes, which is also very important for fisheries, but also for other scientific questions. And that's another example for forest. That's an example for network for fire prevention in that sense. This has been my background, and now we will move to the case study, okay? And I will focus on one project that we had the last 3 years that it's about river intermittency. We understand intermittency as this process that rivers get dry some parts of the year due to droughts, okay? So as you know, fluvial networks are very dynamic, so they contract and expand along the year depending on microclimatic conditions, okay? So when, for instance, there is a drought, river networks contract and the flow reduces until a moment that gets, for instance, dry. We call it dry phase. Rivers can get dry, and when there is a rain event, they can re-wet. Having a dry river is not only important because there is no water flowing, but there are so many processes associated to this drying that I will explain you later. And one which is very important is for the aquatic invertebrates, which are very important, which are a very key important element in river ecosystems. So what is very important is that depending on this dry phase, how long is this dry phase, we can categorize rivers, right? From left to right, if, for instance, they are perennial rivers, and to the right, if they are ephemeral rivers that they only get wet certain parts of the year. We've been generating this type of maps for the global river network, and it's more or less calculated that 50% of river network globally, it's intermittent, so it has moments that can get dry. But high mountains has been mostly ignored. So headwaters are very hard to model, to measure, and we know that they are more and more with climate change getting drier and drier. This is an example of one of our study systems, and this is key for the biodiversity, okay? Having a stream dry up in the mountains is important, okay? As this is very small here, I can share you with you later, but this is something that we did to make outreach, and we showed how a stream, when it gets dry, changes the hydrology, the physicochemistry, the biogeochemistry, but importantly for today, the ecology, okay? So if you have a community here, if you have an inhabitant, an insect here living, and suddenly gets dry, it imposes a challenge, right, for it. So it has to, for instance, emerge, it dies, okay, because there could be more competence here, resources are more limited, the resources change. So having drier rivers in the mountains, it's something new, but it's a challenge, and we need to study it. And how do we study this dryness? So we use this type of sensors that they are water present sensors. I will not go into detail, but they basically measure the presence of water in the streams. And we just built a network of these sensors. We installed 17 in a high mountain catchment, and we install it from at different altitudes and land covers, okay? And basically what we obtain with one of these sensors, as you can see here, in black, you have the conductivity in the lower panel. So in the upper panel, you have the rain. In the lower panel, you have the conductivity. And you can see when the conductivity in black goes below this dashed line, so means that the river or the stream gets dry, okay? So you can really detect periods that the stream gets dry and have, of course, implications for every process, biological process related to this, okay? So we had these 17 streams, and we can obtain with this type of networks is this heat map, where the lower part shows streams that get dry most of the time, while the upper part in blues, those streams that are mostly permanent. In between those that get dry most of the time and those that they are permanent, there are different situations, okay? For instance, because we are measuring at 10-minute intervals, we can see the frequency of dry up. So it's not the same having one stream dry most of the time and then getting wet than a stream that gets dry, for instance, every day or every 5 days. I mean, this imposes somehow like a physical constraint for the communities living there. So one community could be there and know how to adapt to half of the year or like a seasonal drying, but the other one has to adapt to, let's say, recurrent drying periods. So that's very important. So having this physical habitat, this hydrology, it's the first step to understand the biodiversity of these landscapes. Okay. And these are, for instance, some of the results that we obtain. So in our river network, that's very specific for this catchment in the Pyrenees, 30% of the times the river get dry. So these rivers get dry. And in average, a stream that remain dry for a period of 5.2 days. That's in average. In here in the map, you can see the diversity of dryness. And also, it's very important to show that intermittent streams dry up 63 times during 1 year, okay, in average. Streams dry up more than 100 times, so they are, let's say, very stochastic, so they are not predictive, so they can get dry a lot of time, and some others not. For instance, they get dry 2 or 3 times per year. So that's it for the case study, and now we will also give you, so there are several, let's say, perspective or challenges in sensor networks, or let's say hydrological or hydro-biogeochemical sensor networks in high mountains, which is my topic of a study. So there are several. I will focus on 3. For me, the first one, or the first big challenge that we had, that I think Georg also mentioned, is the connectivity. I advanced this. So in our case, there is in our, let's say, in our study site, which is mostly the Aigües Tortes and Llac de Sant Maurici National Park. It's a national park and there is no connection, okay? There is no 4G, 3G, 5G connection. In the end, there is no internet. So it's very hard to get the data out of this area, okay? So in our case, we did not find any option together with the national park or the government to install these antennas. So we had to go up there almost to 3,000 meters and install a network of antennas to be able to get 4G from another place. Okay, so what we did is to create a network of LoRa, not only 4G but also LoRa, so Wi-Fi and LoRa, this low range signal, radio signal, and we have several antennas in our catchment. But this has been like half a year of work, okay? Because you have to check that you have the connection and then check that you also have this two-way connection, that you can also send information to your sensor nodes, to your communication system or to your logging system, okay? And that's very challenging. The second one, antennas, exactly. The second one is the integration and interoperability. So I talk about sensor networks that they can be used for measuring meteorological properties, to measure soil processes or properties, river or lake properties. We also show some sensors that they are meant to use for biodiversity, let's say variables. But there are not a lot of actions or projects that they connect these different fields, okay? So one challenge here, and if we focus on biodiversity, is to not only have sensors or several sensors that allow us, for instance, to track the movement of a specific bird, but also to integrate it with sensors that enable us to, for instance, measure meteorological properties, because we know that for instance, or for instance, the movement of a bird in a specific area can be related to wind or whatever. So integration of sensor networks of different types, okay? So biodiversity networks with meteorological networks, with, for instance, hydrological networks, or what is necessary. So combination of sensors into sensor networks. And the third and last approach, which is part of our lab effort, is this idea of do-it-yourself science, okay? Because at least for me, I've been working since my PhD, so already 15 years with sensors and sensors for water quality, but we have always faced several challenges, into mostly cost challenges, so very expensive sensors from big brands, and then also another challenge is how rigid they are, these commercial sensors, in terms of programming. So you cannot do a lot. They are sensors that they are meant to read one property at a specific time frequency. You can connect them to loggers, but you cannot do much more. So from 3 years, since 3 years, also our lab has or collaborates, or has also some people working, some engineer, electronic engineers, and some informaticians, some IT people working on this or developing sensors for us. Okay, so they work from scratch. What we do is think about our needs, and then we develop, or they develop. I don't develop, because this is the idea of team working. So everyone is focused or has the expertise of one specific topic. So they develop from scratch this type of sensors. So the electronic boards, we buy individual components, and we assemble everything, we solve everything, so we can do whatever we want and make a small changes in the hardware, but also in the software. So what we do is we program this, the sensors, but also the logging stations, or the, let's say, the controlling station. So we can do whatever we want because everything is based on program, and we have access to the program. So the idea is that we can also update the program, we can share the program with others, okay, which is also good because everything is open access. So this is the idea of this do-it-yourself project. We actually have, or we are organizing a session in the next meeting of the Iberian Society of Ecology about this. Actually, we are trying to connect everyone in the Iberian Peninsula, but also in Europe, that is interested or it has some do-it-yourself project related to ecology, and especially to sensing technologies. Okay, so you are more than invited to assist, learn, or expose or present your do-it-yourself project. Okay, and with this last slide, I finish here, and I'm ready to respond to your questions.
Thank you very much for an amazing presentation as well, Lluís.